Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to The Sounds of Film. And joining us on the program today is filmmaker Maximina Juson, who is founder of Who Movies, a film and video production company in Los Angeles. In addition to directing and producing One Person, One Vote, which is the movie that we're going to be discussing today, she was a consulting producer for Mama Bears and was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize at South by Southwest in 2022. She was a producer for the 2020 doc feature Harlem Rising, and she is a 2021 National Endowment for the Humanities grant recipient. Maximina, thank you so much for joining us today on The Sounds of Film.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, this film, One Person, One Vote, is a featured film at the Port Jefferson Documentary Film Festival, and it could not be any more timely. It's all about the Electoral College and how in this country people actually do not have a system where every single vote counts towards selecting the president. A lot of people hear about the Electoral College, but it is a little confusing, and I'm hoping in this discussion and hopefully by people watching your film, people can learn more about it. But let me ask you first, what inspired you to make a film exploring the Electoral College?
Well, it's the way we elect. And when I say we, it's the way the United States elects its highest official in the land, the president. Yet the vast majority of Americans don't really understand how the Electoral College works, or do they know, nor do they know why we have it in the first place. So, no matter what level of education many people are at, it's a huge pain point for the electorate. And so I thought it was a good time to make a film like this. It's long overdue, actually.
Yeah. Can you tell us your personal story? How you got into filmmaking and what led you to being interested in this subject?
Yeah, well, I this is actually my directorial directorial debut. I wanted to become a filmmaker to make this film. In the past, I've done other things that are about interacting with an audience, from being a spoken word artist to a musician to making designing apps and websites online. And because of this kind of diverse background that I had, I thought that it would that I would be uniquely positioned to make a film about the Electoral College, and it would be one that would not only be educational, but also entertaining and accessible, and something that a broad swath of people could access, find accessible.
I myself, I'm involved with the Long Island Music and Entertainment Hall of Fame. This show is called The Sounds of Film, and we play a lot of film soundtrack music. So I personally love music. I am kind of curious about. You mentioned the fact that you, in the past, were involved with spoken word and music.
Mhm.
Can you tell me a little bit about that and why that background you think maybe somehow has helped you as a filmmaker?
Yeah, so my degree it was in creative writing, and I took screenwriting, and at one point I was reviewing screenplays for studios because of my writing background. And so I had a core and foundational understanding of what makes a great story and storytelling. And then when I became a spoken word artist and a musician and interacting with live audiences, understanding, that gave me an understanding of, um, how people interact to information, or performances, right? Just and creating a show, like a set list, for example, a musical set list
Hmm.
is you create that in a way where you're gonna take the audience on an emotional journey, right? And you have ebbs and flows, and you have highs and lows, and you have places where it gets more intense and other places where you've gotta, like,
Right.
create some room to breathe. And so I think all of those sensibilities informed my filmmaking, and I feel like if I hadn't done all those other things, I would have definitely been a different kind of filmmaker. And so understanding that kind of live audience interaction as I was making the film, where you basically have to wait years before you can ever see an audience interact with the content, I kind of could kind of project, right, that emotional journey that I would be taking an audience. And so while they were, while uh, a film viewer is watching the film live, that, the choices that I'm making are a result of understanding how humans interact with content.
That's so
And
interesting
so, mhm,
because the film, the subject matter could be something that may not be that interesting to some people, but I found this film very engaging, and that has to be attributed to your filmmaking skills and maybe some of those things that you just mentioned. It's a very engaging movie, and I think one
thank
of the
you.
reasons it's so watchable is you chose very interesting people. I'm trying to think about the best way to kind of transition into talking about the movie, but it's about the Electoral College. But you show us examples of several different electors, people who
Mhm.
have the position of being the ones who, if their candidate in their state gets selected, they're the ones that actually end up bringing the electoral votes or casting that
That's
electoral
right.
vote for their state. But m- m- first off, why did you choose the people that you did? It's a very it's not exactly who. If one was to just kind of guess who you were going to choose, you have a very interesting, colorful cast of characters. Um, and I think that makes it more fascinating because you get to hear their
Mhm.
stories and you get to learn about
Mhm.
all their different political views and so on.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted the film to be representative of America, right? So I didn't want this to be a film where it was just one perspective, because that's not what America's about, right? And so, and I also wanted to find bold voices and people that would be interesting to watch, and also the kind of folks that I'd be curious about,
right.
as far as learning, what makes them tick, what are their motivations, and what are their intentions. And so, the story of the Electoral College is the story of America, and the presidential election is the one national election we have that really, everyone, who is a citizen can participate, and of voting age can participate. And so, I really worked hard to find participants that represented, a broad, diverse swath of Americans, different ages and different backgrounds, so that it would be as colorful as it could be, and putting an human face on the Electoral College, which is really this kind of really opaque system that happens kind of over there somewhere, wherever that is. Um, but putting this human face on this opaque system, I thought was a great way to kind of make the film accessible, and show the guts of the Electoral College in a way that would be entertaining to actual people, because right now the people don't understand the process. But finding these real world characters kind of just brings it to life in a whole nother way, because most Americans have never even met an elector.
Right. um,
um, so I thought in all of those ways it would be a really captivating way to teach about the Electoral College.
well, great choice. The history is so important, and I follow politics, and I always knew that just the general concept that the popular vote was not necessarily the same as who won the Electoral College, and that can be an issue. But I didn't know
Mhm.
the whole history. And I have
Mhm.
to say that this film really did open my eyes to some stuff that I did not realize. You go into it in great depth in the film, but can you give our listeners just a little sense of um, the whole concept of why the Electoral College was first introduced and its relationship to the North versus the South and the role of slavery and so on?
Yeah, well, I mean, every other election in our country is a simple majority vote, right? Except for electing the president, and that's really curious, and it's also a very curious institution around the world. People look at America, and they really don't understand the process by which we elect our president. It's very non-intuitive. It's counterintuitive for a democracy, right? Where the core concept of democracy is majority rules. But then here in the most important, in the one national election that we have, a runner-up candidate can ascend to the presidency. And um, one thing that one of the scholars says is that, we're really never going to understand the Electoral College until we understand the history. And that is so true. Because why did, the framers create this indirect method of voting? And, at the time of the Constitution, and we go over this, not to give it all away, but at the time of the Constitution, we had about 3 million people, 700,000 of which were enslaved. That's almost a third of the country. And a lot of those people were concentrated in the slaveholding states like Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Maryland, right? And so the delegates were at these 13 states were at the Constitutional Convention, and they're all deciding, how are we going to elect the president? Well, the people would be a good way, to do it. But in states like Virginia, you had a population that was almost about 40% enslaved, which meant that, most of their, or a good portion of their population would not be able to vote. And that would then impact their influence, right, in a centralized government. So they came up with this kind of indirect method of voting, and a lot of people don't understand that piece. There's a lot of talk about the Electoral College protecting small states. But, at the Constitutional Convention, it was a closed door event. They didn't want any press um, having access to the event, and that's because they wanted to speak very candidly about things like slavery, and they talked about slavery every single day. The Southern states were really concerned that slavery would be taken away, and so they wanted to protect that as they put up ultimatums to make sure that the institution of slavery was protected in their states. And so as a result of that, was born the Electoral College. It was like the driving force as to why the Electoral College became the agreed upon solution. And then the Three-Fifths Compromise, which we talk about in the film as well, which is the agreement as far as being able to count enslaved people for purpose of representation and votes in the Electoral College by counting some of them, not all of them. That was the compromise, that we could count them towards representation and votes in the Electoral College, but not actually give them the right to vote. And so this indirect method of voting became an optimal solution to be able to get that representation without allowing those enslaved people any rights in our democracy.
I know it wasn't the major point of the film, and that people should know this, but I never heard so clearly stated in a film the percentage of the population at one point in America that were slaves. It was
Right.
astronomical, and
Yeah.
like I don't I don't,
The
I've
ratio
seen
is
so
pretty
many.
pretty shocking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like I've learned so much through the years about slavery, but like that's just like one thing that's just not always mentioned. I don't think.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people wouldn't know that. Um, I know a lot of
Yeah,
people
no, it
do,
was it
but
was shocking to me when I saw those numbers. I mean, a lot of this history is very shocking to me, and that was obviously a huge impetus for me to make this film because I'm like, why don't we know this? Why don't we know this? This is how we elect our president.
hmm.
But it's a history that's been buried and forgotten and not widely taught.
It's a little confused. Even watching the film, I had to really think deeply about the strategy that was being employed because I think to some extent, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of people would buy into the notion that I don't know how to say it, that every state needed to make sure that they were properly represented
Hmm.
because otherwise more populous states would have more control over less populous states, right? And some states would feel that that's unfair. And I think if people hear that, that's very easy to buy in. And you do show people in the film that express that idea and are against the idea of one vote. Um,
Mhm.
but it's the historical part of it that explains maybe the real intention of why that was done. It wasn't just a matter of just making sure there's equity among the states.
Mhm.
It was the message in the film seems to be was that it was about keeping a very small number of people in those states in control of those states and allowing slavery to go on. Is that what you were trying to say?
Well, so like equity among the states, I think, is represented by the Senate, right? Where every single state has two senators, no matter what. The House um, is computed by population. But really, today, if you look at it, more so than small states having a mathematical advantage, it's the swing states that really get the advantage to the Electoral College system. Because if you're a swing state, over 90% of campaign funds, are spent in your state, in those swing states, because those are the ones that will swing the election one way or the other. And you only need, in the case of 2020, um, advantage of about 44,000 votes, right?
Mm,
To get, to an Electoral College win. And, that preference for the swing states doesn't just happen, during elections because presidents want to keep those states happy, right, in between elections. And so that when elections do come around, that those swing states are happy and will want to, vote for that party and that candidate. And when you look at spending and you see that over 90% is spent in the swing states and you see it playing out right now, the huge focus on visiting the swing states, and speaking to those people and hearing, what they want and appealing, to their wants and needs because they're a swing state because, depending on which way that state goes will can, completely change the outcome. And that's just a difference of sometimes like 11,000 votes in that state.
right.
So, I think that, that's really something, to ponder, more so than this big state, small state thing where some say that's more of a myth because it's really today the swing states that get the biggest boost from the Electoral College.
Just outside of like American politics, do you believe that like philosophically majority rules is a solid idea?
I mean, that's the core concept of democracy, majority rules, right?
Right.
I think I mean, that's pretty intuitive. I mean, that's pretty much how we as Americans function in terms of while we're fighting for our rights and for our laws, we're like, well, listen, this is what the majority of people want, not the tyranny of a minority like a monarchy. The people get to decide, and if the people get to decide, then at the core of that is the majority of people get to decide. Every other election that we have is based off of a simple majority, right, for all of our elected officials except for the presidency.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just questioning it because it seems
Yeah,
like
no.
it seems like throughout history sometimes when it's convenient for people, if they're on one side, they will say that majority rules is a good thing, but then if the majority is in favor of doing something that hurts a smaller group of people, then that's obviously ethically not good. But that can happen too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
theoretically.
whole
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole
theoretically,
history
yeah,
of
there's a
that.
whole host of things. I mean, I guess, at that point you really have to, trust in the goodness of the American people that the majority of people, I mean, I personally believe that the majority of people are good people. Um, I mean, as I'm kind of living in this world and the majority of people that I come across are good people.
Mm,
That's my belief anyway. I consider myself a good person and I'm raising my kids to be good people and all the people that I surround myself are the same, are the same,
right,
for the most part. So, I in general, believe that there is a core goodness to most of humanity and but there's, um, a minority that are really hungry for power, um, and have a different set of motivations, but I don't think that's most people.
right. One of the things that's very powerful in the film is when you use uh, like art and animation to be able to show visuals for things that are historical in nature. Can you tell me a little bit about that choice? It looked great.
Oh yeah, so I wanted this film to appeal to all generations, including young people. And um, so I didn't want to use any period paintings or just the things that you typically see in historical movie. But also we were the history that we were covering is a very painful history. And I also didn't want to use, graphic, pictures of like lynchings and things like that that you see where I feel like there's a lot of documentaries out there that exploit trauma. And that's a painful trauma for some people to watch or a lot of people to watch. And so I wanted to use art as a healing modality. It's a way to kind of pay tribute to a history, but also heal from it at the same time. And so and again, as my background being one of, a multidisciplinary artist and having been a songwriter and a writer and knowing the transformative power of art, for healing, that was the modality that I wanted to present, the history. And so needed to find the right kind of artist who could partner with me in that way. And Pierre Benoit, who did the animation in the film, is an incredible artist that I've known for a very long time, since my 20s in New York City. And I knew that his sensibilities would be perfect. And in kind of bringing this history back to life, my goal was to not have literal depictions of that painful history, but images that represented visual poetry, right? So
Mm.
again, being a poet and using metaphor, how do we present that, using a visual poetry where you're not kind of giving that literal translation of what that history was, but a more poetic one.
It works so well. This is a very powerful film, and it's very timely, obviously, because we have the presidential election coming up. How do you hope that this film will play some part or some role in the upcoming election?
Well, what I love after all the screenings is that there's such robust dialogue. Um, there's never there's there's never a problem with an abundance of questions being asked after the screening. People seem to be hungry for this information because they've been confused about the Electoral College for so long. And a lot of people, at the screenings, will say something like, I feel so much smarter right now because honestly, I
Yeah.
was in the dark about the Electoral College and I didn't understand it. And so what I would love, I feel that my role is to be uh the a fly on the wall of history and to just present, the history in a fair and objective way, and allow the audience to have the agency to decide, you know, what they think, not for me to just knock them over the head with it, like not. like a Michael Moore, for example, is telling you exactly what you should think. My role is to say, hey, here's everything that's out there. Here's the history from beginning to now. Here are the different perspectives, and um, and you decide. But my ask to you is to get educated on it by watching the film, and to be engaged in our democracy and not be a wallflower. I think we're at a moment right now where, we all have to stand up for what we believe in. We all have to fight for the rights that we believe, we deserve. Every right in this country has been fought for, really, if you think about it, from even the beginning in the Revolutionary War and our right to exist. And we need to continue to do that. We can't get complacent. But right now, the vast majority of the American electorate is really in the dark around the Electoral College, its history, and how it works. Such a huge, sweeping problem. And I was really surprised when I did my research that there hadn't been a film about the Electoral College like this already. And it's long overdue. It's kind of mind-boggling that it hasn't been made yet. But here we are. The film has been made. It's showing at festivals all around the country. It's going to be broadcast for free on PBS
Oh, wow.
for all around the country, and, this is our film, you know?
Well, I think it was very smart that you have Trump supporters, Kanye supporters, Jill Stein, Democratic supporters. Um, that way everyone feels like they're represented and they can just look at the facts
Yep,
of what the
exactly.
system is. So I want to
Mhm.
applaud you for that. And it did make
Thank
for a
you.
very entertaining and informative film. And I want to highly recommend that everyone, one way or another, see One Person, One Vote. It's going to be playing at the Port Jefferson Documentary Film Festival. And as you mentioned, it's going to be on PBS. Do you have a website or anything like that that people can go to learn more about the movie and screenings and stuff?
Yeah, one person, one vote dot co, not .com, but .co, one person, one vote .co, and we keep that updated with screenings and information about what's happening around the film. But, there's nothing like seeing the film in the theater, so if you have a chance to see the film in the theater, I highly recommend that. But also go out and tell your friends, tell everybody about the one person, one vote, because this film really is for every single person who can or will vote for president.
I agree. Everybody go out and see it. One person, one vote. Maximina, thank you so much for joining us today on The Sounds of Film.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate being here.